A little bit about your presenter. So my name is Bob Clukey, Associate degree in Electrical Power, Bachelor's degree in Education. I am a non-restricted electrical contractor and a TPC electrical instructor. I am a member of the International Association of Electrical Inspectors and have worked with OSHA for at least 35 years. So I'd like to give you a little bit of history about OSHA. And of course, it was introduced into Congress in 1969. In 1970, President Nixon did sign it into law. And in 1971, the agency was created. In 1969, we had 16,500 deaths in the country. So there was a definite need for us to have some type of agency to help protect workers in the workplace. TPC training systems has been in business since 1969. We do have 3 offices, Chicago, Denver, and Dubai. Our online training, over 1,000 hours of training content. We do also live training, over 2,000 scheduled training classes each year, over 110,000 active students, and we have documented results in training with 97 employees, 29 full-time instructors, and 50 contract instructors. So let's take a look at some of these OSHA citations that occurred in 2014, and we're going to notice some history of a pattern here. Each year, most of these are pretty much still at the top, and the top 10 is year after year after year. So first, I want to give you an idea. When this comes up, you can see 1926. So OSHA has their 1926 regulations, which are construction regulations. Then they also have their 1910 regulations, which are general industry. So we're going to start
Muted.
with, in 2014, 8,241 citations being issued. Then we come to general industry, and we can see that our HazCom program had 6,156. And I'm going to address these as we go through exactly what they all are, and a great way to mitigate some of these citations. Next, we're back into construction and scaffolding. Over 5,000 citations were issued. And then back to general industry with respiratory protection, almost 4,000. Then we stay in general industry with electrical and wiring methods with a little over 3,000 citations being issued in 2014. And forklifts, back in general industry, over 3,000 again. Ladders, so now we're back into the construction industry, a little over 3,000. And we come back into general industry with Lockout, Tagout being cited a little over 3,000. Then we can see, still in general industry, some electrical general requirements, almost 3,000. And lastly, machine guarding with almost 3,000 again, general industry. So let's take a look and see what companies can face if they do have an OSHA inspection, and what they might be liable for. So we'll take a look at this. But first, we'll see a serious violation. So this violation, the employer should have known about this hazard, but possibly didn't know. I mean, so that's really maybe give you an idea on this one. A NIP extension cord. Well, the employer should know that we cannot use a piece of equipment that is defective. So if they didn't know that, then that could be a penalty up to $7,000 for each violation. And this is, so basically on this one, it's not a willful violation. I mean, the employer definitely, did not have the information they needed at the time. So they were doing something wrong, but probably really didn't know they were doing it wrong. Then we have other than a serious violation. So this one here, direct relationship to job safety and or workplace health, unlikely to result in death or serious bodily injury. This could be a penalty of up to $7,000. And it's discretionary. It could be adjusted up, be adjusted down a little bit, but based on the employer's good faith. So if the employer wants to establish a relationship with OSHA, some of these penalties could be reduced. Now I'm going to look at something that's maybe quite a bit more serious. These are willful violations. So on this one, the employer knew that what they were doing was wrong, and they were in complete violation of OSHA standards. And this is a hazardous condition that could definitely cost a worker their life or serious bodily harm, and the employer makes no effort whatsoever to remedy these conditions. So in this case, where the employer knew and then didn't take any action at all, these penalties can range anywhere from $5,000 all the way up to $70,000 for each willful violation. So if you know you're doing something wrong, that's not really good in the eyes of the OSHA inspectors. While a proposed penalty for a willful violation may be adjusted downward, and then that is at times could happen, because maybe you gained a nice relationship with OSHA. But you can also see that if you're not working with OSHA very well, then it could be a court-imposed fine or imprisonment for up to 6 months or both. And so that could happen to the employer, also to an individual, a fine of up to $250,000 for the individual that just looked the other way, or $500,000 for a corporation. And they could be criminally convicted. So we definitely want to try to do the right thing. We don't want to get involved with a willful violation. Okay, so we're going to continue with these penalties for a bit before we address how to mitigate some of these problems. So a repeated violation. So the OSHA came in and found something, and the employer did not correct it. So a repeat violation can carry a fine of up to $70,000 each. A great thing. And if you fail to pay OSHA, so OSHA comes in, finds a problem, and you just decide you're not going to pay. Well, that can be up to $7,000 for each day that it goes beyond the date that that money was due OSHA. We also see a minimal violation here. So no direct or immediate relationship to safety or health. These violations, they are documented by the OSHA inspectors, but not included on the citation, so it's not going to cost you anything. But it is good to get these corrected because they are going to be documented by the OSHA inspector. Okay, some other compliance violations that may incur. We'll take a look at these. If you're not going to be truthful with OSHA, so we're going to falsify some records. We're going to try to paint a picture that's really not the true picture. That can bring a fine of up to $10,000, up to 6 months in jail, or possibly both. So sometimes the money can be paid, but I'm sure nobody wants to end up in prison for any of this. And we can see that violation of posting requirements, civil penalty of up to $7,000. So that as we walk through the workplace, there are certain items that OSHA wants to have posted so that the employees know their rights. So you're going to have an OSHA poster up there. It's going to detail the rights of the employee. Many times we see the general duty clause where the employer has to provide a workplace that is going to be free from anything that might cause me to die or get seriously physically hurt. Our employees need to know that. So we have to post that in a public area that all the employees can see. If there was an OSHA officer on site and you did assault that person, that could be a fine of not more than $5,000 and possible imprisonment for not more than 3 years. We hope that would never happen. In addition to all these high dollar costs, of course, injuries by not being on par with occupational health and safety standards can lead to even greater costs. So you've got to take time. Maybe your HR person has to go to all of these meetings with OSHA that might end up in court. Your insurance company is going to get involved. And just a lot of, costs that are associated with these things that we could definitely try to avoid very easily. Okay, so number one on our list that we saw earlier was fall protection. So falls in 2014 had 8,241 citations issued. And how can we maybe make sure this doesn't happen? Well, the best way to prevent fall protection, continuously out there, monitoring, evaluating the work sites, documenting it, taking pictures, repairing whatever you might see, make sure we have guardrail systems in place, and of course we've got to have our safety harness and lanyards on. And in the construction industry, when you reach a height of 5 feet above your work area, 6 feet above your work area, then you're going to have fall protection. In general industry, it is 4 feet. So you got to make sure that those workers are wearing their safety harness and lanyards. But remember, going out there and doing audits is going to be very nice to make sure the workers are complying, because if they're not used to wearing these personal protective equipment, then they're never going to wear it. There'll be an accident, and OSHA would definitely react to that. HazCom. Okay, so Hazard Communication Standard. When I first started, this was mostly MSDS, with Material Safety Data Sheets. And on December 1st, 2013, they changed that to Safety Data Sheets. This has to deal with the chemicals that we might find in the workplace. So we've got to make sure that we train in the hazards of these chemicals. Whatever chemicals might be present, we've got to make sure that we're doing some training there so that the employees know exactly what could happen to them. We've got to give them some procedures on how they can protect themselves from these hazards. Again, it's very important that we document these procedures. So you can put these in your SDS binder. You train your workers on it, have them sign off that they've been trained, and that looks very good when OSHA inspector does come, that you have trained in the hazards and let the employees know about what's going on. And also, the operations where hazardous chemicals are present, so we've got to know those locations where the hazard chemicals are being used. Details, location, and availability of. So each employer needs a written hazard communication program. And you've got to make sure that this program will detail what the hazard is, how it could affect the employee. You've got to have a master list of all these hazardous chemicals. You've got to explain the labels that are on the containers. So many times we'll get some generic containers, and there might be cleaning solutions in there. There might be chemicals in there that are dedicated to the process we're using. And we have to know exactly what is inside that container. So each container has to have a label, and depending on how you identify that, the worker would know exactly what is inside those containers. Then that labeling system, whatever labeling system that you come up with, get to make sure that it's consistent and it's on all of our containers where hazardous chemicals might be. Then these safety data sheets. So these safety data sheets have to be in a binder, and we have to make sure that the safety data sheets are accurate, that we know the chemical, what that chemical could do to our body, whether we inhaled it or whether it entered our body through the skin, and what are some of the procedures to make sure that after that chemical did get in our body, what we could do to still try to keep ourselves safe. So these safety data sheets are very important. Also, any methods used to detect the presence or release of hazardous chemicals. So whatever your detection system might be, the OSHA inspector is going to have to know all of that. Continuing with HazCom, to make sure that we don't get cited on this, and of course in 2014 there were over 6,000 citations with just this one this one violation, HazCom. So we've got to have in writing a hazard communication program. Each employer is responsible for that. We've got to inform all of our staff, of course, of the hazardous chemicals, and you've got to have this binder. The binder, if it is maintained electronically, you should also have a hard copy near the work area where that is. So, for instance, if I got some type of chemical in my eye, another worker could go over to that binder very close to where I was and say, oh, look at this, you better not put water in there, or you better get to the eye wash station right now, because this will give them some good information of what we have to do if we do come in contact with that chemical. So you can keep them electronically, but always good to have a hard copy right near the work area. We have to have a list of all the hazardous chemicals in the facility. It's a master list. It's going to be kept in the SDS binder, either electronically or the hard copies. And we've got to put these labels on all these containers. So when I pick a container up, I have to know what type of chemical might be in that container. And that's going to be my labeling system. I've seen different employers use colors. I've seen them use different types of symbols so that that could communicate to the worker how that chemical could affect their body. So scaffolding, in 2014, there were over 5,000. So we're back in the construction industry now. And we take a look at scaffolding and see what we might have to do. We want to make sure that we're properly maintained. So this is going to come back a lot to the manufacturer of the scaffolding. When you purchase scaffolding, you want to save that owner's manual and all written material that came from the manufacturer itself. They're going to tell us how to maintain it. Develop a log. Make sure that we have documented how we maintained our scaffolding. Make sure we're looking for any defects that might happen there. So you've got to instruct your employees on how to assemble the scaffolding. Again, the manufacturer can help us with that through their manual that comes with the scaffolding. It's very important here that you would have your workers sign off that they were trained in how to assemble that scaffolding. Documentation is going to be something that's going to be very important in OSHA's eyes. If you did not document it, then it never happened. So we've got to make sure that we are documenting everything, and the manufacturer can help us with their written material that comes with their equipment. Also got to understand that there is a weight limit on the scaffolding. I've seen people go and store items on there, climb up the scaffolding, put in, very heavy items on there, whether they're tools or material. So we have to know the weight limits of the scaffolding also. TPC Online, on all those topics that I just talked about, we have an excellent learning management system that can document all that for you. So we have this online training that talks about falls, talks about HazCom, talks about the proper method of dealing with scaffolding. And anybody that is familiar with us knows that this online training is very easy, it's nice, it's worker friendly, and in OSHA's eyes, if you're training your workers, OSHA's going to be very, very happy about that. So respiratory protection. And here we had almost 4,000 citations in 2014. But again, you can see that OSHA wants you to document. So you have to have a written policy detailing your respiratory protection. It has to be very clear, and it's got to be appropriate for the hazard. How many people have just put on a respirator and gone into an area and they're not even sure that respirator is going to protect them from the hazard that's in that area? So one respirator does not take care of everything that we might encounter out there. So we have to make sure that it is the right respirator. It has to be sized and stored properly. And this is true of almost any personal protective equipment in the eyes of OSHA, that we want to make sure it fits properly. We want to make sure that it is sanitary, and we always want to store it in the proper manner. So when the next worker picks up that respirator, It has to be clean, ready to go, and if it does have straps on it or adjustments, they have to be trained on how they can adjust it to their face. And we can see that old word again, document. So we have to maintain our equipment properly. Again, the manufacturer of the respirators can help us with this. You would see in their documentation completely how that respirator has to be maintained. And training. So again, here is where TPC Online could help you tremendously. We have to train the employee on the proper use of the equipment. And that's a recurring theme that I keep seeing here, documentation and training. Those two items will take care of almost all your problems. So we want to make sure that that's a good message. So electrical wiring, and these wiring methods, we have a little over 3,000 citations on these. The one big thing that OSHA is concerned about in this area is extension cords. So they really look heavily on your use of extension cords. You have to understand that if you see the picture on the right-hand side that cord is nicked, you have to know that we really can't repair that cord. That cord was UL listed, and it was UL listed with the insulation intact completely. We can never really get that back to the condition that it was when UL listed that. So you really can't repair that cord. The best thing you can do is cut that cord up and make sure nobody else can use that cord. Dispose of it properly. Top left-hand side, again, the extension cords. You can see that we have a third prong on that extension cord. Very important that we have that equipment grounding conductor present on extension cords. I was on OSHA's website last night. I saw fatal facts. A 16-year-old worker died because the third prong was not on his extension cord. So we've got to be very, very careful about that. So it says follow the regulations in the current National Electrical Code. Well, that's pretty good if you're in construction. If you're in 1926, you are installing equipment. But if you're in general industry, maybe our equipment's already been installed. So if you're in general industry, you might want to take a look at the National Electrical Code and determine, was the equipment installed properly, especially grounding and bonding. That's going to be very important for worker safety. I should bring up to you now that we are currently on the 2014 National Electrical Code, but shortly we're going to be on the 2017 National Electrical Code. So that document will come out sometime around September or October, and we're going to have a brand new code book to follow. And sometimes it's tough to keep up on all those items. Follow the manufacturer's installation guidelines. This is extremely important. You can see the document, the National Electrical Code right there. In section 110.3b, it says that you have to install the equipment in accordance with the instructions that come with from the manufacturer, and you also have to use that equipment in the accordance with those instructions that come from the manufacturer. So it's very important that we just don't throw away all this information that the manufacturer gave us. A good example of that is I've been in many facilities, and I'll do a little walkthrough. I will see a 2-wire heater underneath a desk. You know, their feet are cold, and they want to try to, get a little bit warmer down there. Well, if we look at the instructions that come from the manufacturer on that little 2-wire heater, it says residential use only. What would OSHA do with that? They would unplug that heater. They would cut that cord so it's only about 1/4 of an inch long, so you couldn't use it again, and issue you a $7,000 citation. So we can never go wrong by following what the manufacturer gives us for their guidelines. This is another pet peeve of mine here. If I am going to do installation in accordance with the National Electrical Code, if I could have a third party come and inspect that. Now, this is an entity that has no vested interest in the installation. They're going to come and they're going to give us their best judgment if we did it correctly or not. But what else does that do? It gives us documentation that the work we did was correct. We filed that. If OSHA ever did show up and there was some type of incident there, boom, we have the documentation from a third party, not from us, that sure enough, we did that correctly. Have qualified personnel performing the work. This is extremely important. So it really doesn't matter much what the task is, but in OSHA's eyes, they want their employee to be qualified. What does that mean to the employer? Well, that means that the employer has to ensure that the worker has some skills and knowledge that are related to the equipment that they're working on. They have to know how that equipment operates, and they have to know how to keep themselves safe. OSHA wants a list of your qualified personnel. So if I was an OSHA inspector, I could walk into a facility and I could say, give me a list of all your qualified electrical workers, let's say. And I could walk up to one of those electrical workers and I could say, tell me the personal protective equipment you wear for 6 calories per centimeter squared of incident energy. Well, if the worker could tell me what that personal protective equipment was, everything would be all set. If they couldn't, OSHA's probably going to dig a little bit deeper. And you have to remember with qualified personnel that I could be qualified for one piece of equipment and not qualified for another. So you've really got to have that documented, that worker XYZ, he can work on this elevator, but worker ABC, he can't work on that elevator. So you get to make sure they're qualified, and again, qualified skills and knowledge about how the equipment was installed, how the equipment operates, how to keep yourself safe around that equipment. Okay. We did mention that TPC Tranco is a little bit different than TPC Online, and here's another picture of me, unfortunately, but there I am. I conduct a lot of these seminars, just finished one in Boulder, Colorado this week, but we go out and we train in the current regulations of the National Electrical Code, and we do over 2,000 of these 2-day public seminars, and many times we will go to you. So we'll have what we call on-site courses, and we will tailor our material to whatever it is you need us to do. And we can help qualify your electrical workers. Once we issue a certificate with certain CEUs, we could also have them demonstrate they know the knowledge through written tests. We sometimes have hands-on testing where they have to actually just demonstrate that they do know the equipment and they do know how to keep themselves safe. So this is one way that TPC Tranco can help you with training. So forklifts, again, qualified. So we've got to make sure that operator is competent. I've been in many facilities where the operators were actually outside contractors. So the facility themselves did not employ these forklift operators. So what you should understand about that, whether they are a contractor or a permanent employee of your own, that you could be held liable for that because they're operating your forklift at your facility on your property. So you can't just think that if you go ahead and say, oh, we've got contractors doing that, that's up to them. Oh no, it's on your property and it's your equipment. You've got to make sure that they are qualified also. So you can see that we want to make sure that we certify these operators. We want to make sure that we come out and document and evaluate that they are operating the forklift correctly, give them some refresher training. And then, of course, we want to make sure that the forklift has been maintained properly, so we're going to examine it. And if there is any damaged forklifts, we're going to take it out of service. This is true. I told you also on the extension cord, we're going to take it out of service, so that's true. But also remember that even PPE, if we have damaged or defective PPE, that also has to be taken out of service. So ladders. So now we're back into 1926, which is the construction industry. This is a pet peeve of mine. I have a neighbor that lives very close to me that was injured on a ladder, and it was just very unfortunate. He was only about 3 feet high when it happened. So one, we've got to make sure we've got the right ladder. So we're going to use that ladder only for its designated purpose. Many different types of ladders out there. You can see this one down here is a blue color. Well, that's going to be a certain weight requirement. Also, it's going to be whether it is non-conductive or not. So the color of the ladder makes a big difference. You want to make sure that we're not on that top step. And I have a thing about ladders. I like to say this. I've got a belt buckle rule, that if my belt buckle gets outside the rails of that ladder, then I've got a good chance of falling off that ladder. So we don't want to get very high, and we want to make sure that we have 3 points on that ladder, either 2 feet in the hand or whatever we need. Always have 3 points of your body making contact with that ladder. We want to make sure that there are no structural defects. So this is where the manufacturer can help us again. They give us a little guide on how to inspect that ladder. And if it is defective, we want to take it out of service. Get rid of the ladder. So very important. Also, they have to be on stable and level surfaces, unless we can secure them somehow. But you want to make sure that the ladder is going to be safe when we start climbing up that ladder. Lockout, tagout. We're back in general industry now. So a little over 3,000 citations for lockout, tagout in 2014, which surprised me because lockout, tagout has been around since the 60s. And we should now have a good handle on lockout, tagout. This is an item that is extremely important for worker safety. So we do have to have that written, documented policy. This goes back to that word documented a lot. So OSHA could come in and ask, let me see your lockout, tagout policy. You want to have it in writing and make sure that it is readily available for them. You have to audit this program at least once a year. So that means that somebody, maybe the safety manager, is going to go out and take a look at one of the workers and make sure that they are following the procedures that are in that written documented policy. I would also develop a form for that. That would be my audit form. The worker would sign it, the safety manager would sign it, and that has to be stored somewhere that if OSHA does show up, at least they can see that you did go out and audit that program. The last facility I was at, unfortunately, did have a citation, not because they weren't using lockout, tagout. It was because they didn't audit the program. And in OSHA's eyes, if you don't document it, then it never happened. So you've got to make sure you come up with that form. Failure to provide training. OSHA also says once a year you have to train your employees on your lockout, tagout policy. It would be nice here to make sure that there's some type of little written test, also some type of hands-on activity that you can document with pictures, with videos, and say, yes, we trained our workers on lockout, tagout. The other thing that you should remember on all of these policies is enforcement. That if you don't enforce it, then you don't have a policy. So if you do see a worker that has been trained in accordance with your policy, you've got to go out there and enforce it and have some consequences. If there's no consequences, then you really do not have a policy for that. So enforcement is very important in this area. So general electrical requirements, and we had almost 3,000 of these in 2014. Maintain working space about electrical equipment. I know this. In today's world, space is money. But unfortunately, around electrical equipment, we need, depending on the voltage and depending on the area that we are in, what else might be near there, we're going to need at least 3 feet of minimum working space about our electrical equipment. That means we can't store items in there. That means that, when we walk up to that electrical equipment, we don't have to move anything. We just walk up and it's free and clear. There's 3 conditions associated with this, and the lowest one is 3 feet, and then we have another one that's about 3.5 feet and another one that's 4 feet, depending on the voltage and depending on what is near it. The condition number 3 will tell us if we have 2 pieces of electrical equipment facing each other and one of them is 480, then we need at least 4 feet. If we just have an electrical panel on the wall, well, then we only need 3 feet in front of that one. And condition number 2 would be if we have some concrete in front of that panel, that would be around 3.5 feet. Label all our panel schedules accurately. So think of this. Many of you have been in your facilities a long time. There's probably been changes made. Maybe those changes did not get reflected on that little panel schedule that's inside that door. In the last company I was in, they had a citation that cost them $50,000. And they looked at me and they said, what could we have done? I said, you could get a circuit tracer, trace those out. It sends a signal on your conductors, and then you have a receiver to pick that signal up. It really can be very beneficial for you. OSHA wants to make sure that if we are de-energizing something, if there's an accident and we have to get the equipment shut down quickly, that these panel schedules are all labeled 100% perfect. This is 110.3b, so this is a key for OSHA. List of the labeled equipment. So immediately they're talking about, do we have a UL listing on there, or a CSA, or TUB, or ETI, ETL. There's a lot of testing, third-party testing entities out there that put their list on that equipment. So they have tested it under laboratory conditions. And they said, as long as you use this equipment in accordance with the instructions, you're not going to have a problem. Well, the minute that we start modifying that equipment, or we use it outside the parameters that the manufacturer gave us, that can be a big issue with OSHA. So cables with damaged insulation or exposed bare conductors not replaced. And believe it or not, I do see this quite often, that there'll be some maybe 500 kc metal just hanging from the ceiling, and they're all energized. And I said, why do you have those? Oh, in cases of emergency, this is our backup power. Well, that just can't be. We've got to make sure that because of shock, arc flash, arc blast, we've got to make sure that these cables are intact and ready to go. Install arc flash warning labels on electrical equipment. So I'm not sure how many people understand this one, but this has been a requirement since 2004. And when we walk up to a piece of electrical equipment, it has to tell us what the voltage is. It also has to tell us what the arc flash boundary is. In other words, how close am I going to get to that equipment before I receive a third-degree burn, which is an incurable burn. And also it has to have the incident energy on there. So the incident energy is the amount of heat that would come at me, and I have to make sure that my clothing is rated higher than whatever that label says. This is relatively new, 2004, so some companies will have this on, some companies won't. The last 2 companies I was at, one had it, one didn't. And the one that did have it didn't understand that it says electrical equipment, because I was walking through their facility and I saw 208 120 volt panels with no arc flash warning label on it. And I looked at the person that was giving me the tour, and I said, what's the story here? And he said, oh, we don't need it. That voltage is too low. I said, no. I said, there's a shock hazard there, and with long clearing times, you definitely could have an arc flash. So this is something that OSHA has been stressing in the last few years, and hopefully you can get these on there relatively quickly if you don't have them already. Now, we do have a consulting service, so we have a professional engineer on staff that does arc flash analysis. And one of the best things, I guess, about our analysis is our platform. So we can go ahead and put that on what we call our iSchematic platform and give your worker a tablet. And on that tablet, we're going to put what PPE he has to wear. Heck, we're going to put the owner's manual on there. We're going to put how to replace a part, how to order a part. We'll put some pneumatics on there, hydraulics, everything that you wanted to know about that piece of equipment we can have on that platform. Give that notebook to your worker, and they've got it at their fingertips. So we're a little bit unique when we do an arc flash assessment. We try to get that information straight to the worker as quickly as possible with any other pertinent information they might need. So machine guarding, our last topic that we have, about 2,700 citations in 2014. You want to make sure that the worker cannot make contact, so we've got to prevent the hands, arms, or any part of that worker's body from making contact with those dangerous moving parts. Be secure, so workers can't easily or remove or tamper with the safeguard. We've got to make sure it is solid. Protect from falling objects, so that safeguard has to make sure that nothing can fall into moving parts also. And create no new hazards. So we don't want to make sure that that safeguard is going to create a shear point or a jagged edge or an unfinished surface. And lastly, no interference. We do not want that to interfere with the task that the worker has to perform. So in that case, if it did interfere with that poor worker, he's going to try to find a way to bypass it or disregard it or whatever. So our machine guarding has to be simple, easy, and user-friendly. Okay. As employers, we've got to make sure that we keep our employees safe right off the bat. So that's the general duty clause. When we go to work each day, we've got to make sure we are in an environment that is not going to cause me to die or get seriously physically hurt. If we do have hazards in the workplace, we definitely have to educate our employees. We have to document everything, keep up to date on all of OSHA compliance issues. OSHA does have some way to help us. So they've got these outreach training programs. They've got a consultation assistance program where you could bring OSHA into your facility and you requested them to come in, and they would do an inspection, and if they did find something, they would give you a certain amount of time to correct that with no citation. You also want to remember that there are 25 states that are federally recognized to have their own OSHA program. So every state has an OSHA program, and sometimes it might be easier to work with a state program than it would be the federal government. Because the federal government, they're limited in their resources, of course, and the state program might be a little more user-friendly for you. That maybe it's somebody that you know. Also, OSHA has what they call a voluntary protection program, where if you become part of the VPP program, they will come in, they will help hit documentation.
Hi everybody, we're experiencing a technical difficulty here. Bob appears to have muted himself. Just bear with us a moment, we'll get him back on.